Thank you, Professor Alvi. I think this is certainly in many ways it is a revealing, for all of us. And I was aware of some of the aspect of popular media being used by ISIS, but the way it has penetrated the popular culture. I mean, the Nasheeds, as you have explained, and the narco corridors, the way that is part of popular culture, I think that completely amazes one's minds, and it's really something which especially people in the security and strategic community and researchers, they need to perhaps work more on it to find out and to counter, actually, as you were saying, in a very delicate way, because this is not something that is only used by these violent groups, but also is part of, beyond it is beyond that. So I think that is something very interesting, a very good presentation. Thank you, Professor Alvi.
Thank you.
Uh, I'm sure there would be a lot of questions. May I invite Dr. Kishishian, Professor Kishishian, to have his question or comments?
Thank you very much. Not only was a very interesting presentation, but the subject is just simply fascinating. And we don't hear much about this. So your groundbreaking research is fantastic. Now, I have one fundamental question, which was not clear to me. I'm sure you addressed this, but maybe you can elucidate some more on it. In the nasheeds that are spread by these ISIS types, terrorists, and so on, what is the venue for them to actually perpetuate these songs or sing them? Where is the access? Because I assume that this is the main difficulty that they will have, since they cannot go on radio, since they cannot go on television, since it's not like in Los Angeles where you have the narco corridas can have the free-for-all. What is the mechanism that ISIS uses to get this message out, and how do they do it?
Thank you. A great question. And it was very easy when ISIS was at its peak. In the capital, the so-called capital of, or the headquarters of the so-called caliphate, Raqqa, Syria at the time, they had an entire headquarters for a media center that operated 24/7 just for the purpose of propaganda. They have had a radio station. They've had written literature in many languages, but most effective have been Hollywood quality videos that they would put out from their media center in Raqqa globally, thanks to the tools of the internet, particularly social media like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and a few others. Since their defeat, they've gone underground, of course, and on the internet, they've gone to the dark web or encrypted methods of messaging. Now, in terms of nasheeds, anyone can do a nasheed. All you need is a smartphone with a camera in it and a video capability in it. And because it doesn't require instruments, all you need is a group of males, right, men, to gather in front of a camera and sing a nasheed. Anyone can compose a nasheed, right? Especially if they know Arabic, okay? So that's all you need. So even after ISIS's territorial defeat, they still have cells that proliferate globally, and particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, and now even in Mozambique and parts of Afghanistan. And don't forget that Abu Sayyaf in Philippines is still a part of ISIS, since they vowed allegiance to ISIS. So those groups that used to be Al-Qaeda affiliated at the peak of ISIS, often some groups or cells that used to be Al-Qaeda pledged allegiance to ISIS. So technically speaking, ISIS is still active globally, but in small cells here and there. On the internet, they're still pretty much alive. In terms of ideology, they're very much alive. And these kinds of nasheeds continue to produce and put out messages that we're still alive, we're working for our cause. Our caliphate might be, let's just say, dismantled for now, but the essence of ISIS is still alive and functioning. And the nasheeds in particular continue to relay that message. So it's very easy for anyone to make a nasheed.
Thank you, Professor. That was a very, I mean, we know that ISIS was actually not only targeting the immediate, people in Iraq and Syria. They had a much wider, audience in mind, and that is something which perhaps you are also alluding to.
Yes.
We have Ambassador Sanjay Singh, who has served as India's ambassador to Iran and follows the region very, closely. Sir, if you have any question or comment.
No, Professor Alvi, it was a delight listening to you and listening to what you had to say about the comparison between narco songs of the gangs in Mexico and the ISIS and other jihadists. Now, violence and songs associated with violence, whether it is state violence or violence by individuals or groups, always have songs associated with them. To some extent, ballads sung by soldiers when they go into battle have similar lyrics. Have you made a comparison of that?
That's a great idea. I have not. So thank you for that. So yes, especially, in fact, I presented this in a different audience last week, and someone, I think he was British, he said similar things about, well, remember in the old days when we were marching, towards, let's say in the World War, right, 1 or 2, or in the American Civil War, for example. So every battle has a battle hymn, right? So every service has a battle hymn. So that's a great angle to look at it from. So I'll definitely look into that more. So thank you for that. Absolutely. And in terms of just creative license, I mean, what can be more violent than Romeo and Juliet, right? If we think about it.
Thanks. We have Dr. Alvi with us, and he wanted to raise a question. Alvi?
Sure.
Unmute.
Thank you, Professor, for a very fascinating talk. This is to follow up from what Professor Joseph have just asked you with regard to this sort of a narrative. I think most of the discourse with regard to ISIS propaganda, particularly from the mid 2017 onwards, have been on the defeat, the territorial defeat, and the financial decline of the outfit. But as you rightly mentioned about the role of these soft narratives in terms of music, how far, ma'am, do you think this has been able to, garner the support of impressionable youths or new recruits, like following the territorial defeat in Syria and Iraq? Because this is something which we have also seen in Southeast Asian context also, like we have Katiba Nusantara and other outfits that have tried to ignite this sort of anti sentiments in the region. And any effective counter narratives did you come across? Because some of the discussions that you just spoke about, I think this scholar from Middle East Forum, Ayman Jawad Al-Tamimi, had also been dealing with this subject for quite a while. So if you can just throw some light on the effectiveness of this narrative, as well as any counter narratives that have been in the fray.
Yeah, in terms of counter narratives, I'm left scratching my head because I don't really see anything that would be as effective as the narrative itself, sadly speaking, because especially at the peak of ISIS power, they used the nasheeds as the backdrop to their very high quality produced videos. And I don't know how many of you in the audience have seen ISIS videos, but when you put the songs and lyrics of a nasheed to a video showing the quote unquote heroic ISIS soldiers going against what they call the Crusaders, it just invokes something like Robin Hood. It invokes something like the heroes of previous wars, good against evil, of course, through the lens of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whatever it might be. It was effective in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in terms of recruiting fighters there. Of course, we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have the other technological means to have the speediness of getting a nasheed out and spread so quickly as we do with the internet today and social media today. But nasheeds were effective in their own way, in addition to other factors to gain recruits to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. They were a factor, but not the only factor. There were many other, like for example, Pakistan played a major part in getting Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. So did Saudi Arabia, so did a few other players, including the United States, and particularly the Reagan administration. If you're interested more in that, I refer to Charlie Wilson's War, the book and the movie. You can see in terms of pure politics, in that context, pure Cold War politics, that there were concerted efforts to recruit Mujahideen globally to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. But the use of the term jihad was very prominent and not colored by the negativism of the word jihad today. In those days, jihad was a good word because in the Cold War, you were fighting against the evil spread of communism that the Soviets were doing by ideological means, but also by invasion, kinetic invasion into Afghanistan and other places. So for Afghanistan, that became a rallying cry for a good jihad, right? A positive jihad to fight against the evil spread of communism by the evil Soviets. So jihadist nasheeds back then were in a more positive light, okay? And they were effective. But again, in combination with other means of effectiveness to get mujahideen, to get operatives, to get those inspired for fighting the jihad against the Soviets to drop what they're doing, whether they're in the Philippines or Thailand or parts of China or parts of Africa or the Middle East or even the United States or Canada and Europe, right? Because they needed the manpower to fight against the Soviets. But that was purely in the Cold War context, right? Fast forward to today, and it's even more effective, as I said in the presentation, because of the internet tools and other technology tools that we have, and the speed with which you can produce, let's say, a nasheed, which is much easier than producing a narco corrido because they use instruments and a band and they do it for profit, right? But still, both have very easy ways today to put things on the internet, right? And with the hit of a keyboard button, proliferate it all over the world. So they are still very effective.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Moinuddin Ahmed, he wanted to ask a question. Moinuddin, if you...
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. What to say about the lecture? It was definitely very good, but it reminded me of a 2012 book called Poetry of the Taliban.
Oh, yeah.
And that book talks about, beyond Islamization of the discourse and what the Taliban have written about, um, s- extra from, Islamizing their discourse, very basic poetry that they have done. Now, the idea here is not to humanize what ISIS have done, but have you, during your research, have you come across any sort of, literature that also talks about the very basic things that the ISIS are talking about? I have been following Eamon's work, but I have not come across. I just wanted to ask whether that could be a possibility for research or not.
I'm sorry, if you can clarify what ISIS is talking about relative to what? Their
Yeah.
defeat?
Like in poetry of the Taliban, they have chosen the poetry that was not related to their fight and, Islamizing their cause. They were
Oh,
just,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
they were just talking about the poetry on Eid, the poetry about bread, daily bread, their daily struggles and all. So have the ISIS fighters also come up with that kind of poetry to, to from their end to humanize their own cause?
Not to my knowledge. It's a great question, but not to my knowledge. What they do in terms of propaganda are mainly to glorify violence and glorify themselves as the righteous soldiers who are going to fight the enemy. And of course, the way Al Qaeda and ISIS paint this is that enemies of Al Qaeda and ISIS are enemies of Islam in general. And that's another way, through their propaganda that they kind of hook people, right, into believing, because narrative is very important here. What they say in the nasheeds or just generally what they portray in their videos, that's very important, and especially to the young, impressionable people out there. But in terms of their humanizing, which I think you're hitting on something extremely important. ISIS is, unfortunately for us, extremely strategic in what they do. So when they were able to rule over the territories they conquered, some of the first things they've done outside of the virtual world is in real life, they immediately would set up their bureaucracy. And part of the bureaucracy would be education for especially boys. And if you were unfortunate enough to be conquered, right, by ISIS, you would be forced to send your children, especially boys, to ISIS schools. That's where they would start. They target children very quickly and strategically to indoctrinate the children in ISIS ideology. Then they would also make sure that they are seen by them of themselves by the people they just conquered as their benefactors. By, for example, if there's no running water, they provide the running water. If there's no electricity, they do that. So the social services they would provide would be very systematic, and they would try to be very quick to do that to make sure that they're seen as benefactors, as opposed to, for example, whoever was governing them prior to being conquered by ISIS. They, even in their propaganda videos, you've seen ISIS people, they're of course men, who would go around street by street, making sure that the shops were full of supplies, the produce carts were full of produce and food, and the butcher shop was full, and that the people were frolicking in the streets, of course, with proper codes observed by ISIS codes, and able to live with some quality of life, right? That life under ISIS was not difficult or harsh. So they're very strategic in their messaging in that regard.
Thank you, Professor. We have Professor Jayati Srivastav, who teaches at the School of International Studies in JNU. Ma'am, if you have any question or comments, we welcome your comment, ma'am.
No, thank you. I think it was a very interesting sort of talk, and I'm glad I could participate. I just have one query. two sort of groups that you have chosen, and I think it's a very good and dexterous use of popular culture, poetry, and all that. But one in particular uses religion phenomenally well, while other has a different kind of nature. So I was wondering how, as a researcher, you went about exploring that facet, because religion has its own way of sort of panning out very differently as compared to the other case that you have. Thanks.
If I heard that correctly, the question has to do with the one being religion focused
Yeah,
and the other not.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good one. And I actually raised that question in my mind as I was writing the paper. And as I did the research, I discovered that when you connect the dots between narco corridos and their bands and their band leaders and the composers of the lyrics of narco corridos, and the fact that they are the mouthpiece through songs of the drug cartels that they are hired to praise, basically, that the drug cartels and their leaders even have a religious component to them. It's not so overt in the narco corridos songs and lyrics, but in the customs and practices of the drug cartel members and leaders, there's a lot of superstition-based religious beliefs. And they're combined with some form of Catholic Christianity, Catholicism, and some form of superstitious, almost cult-like observances and traditions and rituals. You get a kind of glimpse of that if you watch popular movies or series like Breaking Bad and even Narcos on Netflix. If you all have seen Breaking Bad, for example, there are a couple of scenes where the twins who come from Mexico, the twins being drug cartel assassins or executioners, they're twin brothers who actually go to a shrine and pray for and make offerings with money to whatever symbol they have or icon they have in that shrine, and post a picture of their enemy and use that ritual to get religious blessings in order for them to achieve their goal to kill that enemy whose picture they posted next to their icon. So it's a combination of cultism, a combination of some aspect of Catholicism, and a lot of superstition, which is very interesting. And that book I pointed out at the end, which I said, if you look up that book, Beware, it's very, very graphic. It goes into details about the narco religious culture and cultism, cultish practices and rituals. It doesn't really come out in their songs or their narco ballads, but if you go deep into the origins of those ballads and the connectivity between the ballads and the drug cartels, you discover that there is a religion or a set of religious rituals and practices and superstitions, even in the narco category as well.
Thank you, Professor. We have Gulshan ma'am also here, who is who is one of the teachers. Actually, most of us in audience here, she has taught us, and especially for me, I think my research interest in Saudi Arabia and Gulf has a lot to do with her classes, which I attended during my MPhil days. Ma'am, if you have any question or comment.
Thank you, Muddassir. Unfortunately, I joined very late today, so I only could catch the last 10 minutes of her presentation. Fascinating, brilliant. I'm going to see it on the YouTube. It was really very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
And by the way, she's also from Gujarat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the real thing.
I'm sorry,
Who
I don't speak Gujarati, but
Oh, you are.
yeah, I was born in Gujarat. I was
Oh,
born
okay.
in Gujarat, in
Okay.
Ahmedabad. Yeah.
Okay. I was born in Bombay, but I'm Gujarati all through.
Okay.
Thanks, thanks, ma'am. We have a couple of questions in the chat box which I could see. You know, one of the things which Dr. Michael Barak was asking. You know, for example, is there any difference, you know, one finds between the Nasheeds in, say, early stages of ISIS spread in Iraq or late stages? I think you were talking about 2017 during your examples. So, is there any difference in terms of, you know, the early stages and later stages?
The only thing I'll say is that I can observe about that is that in the later stages, the ISIS Nasheeds were desperately trying to reassure its operatives and loyalists and sympathizers globally that even though they have lost territory and the caliphate has been dismantled, basically the message is don't worry, ISIS is still there in spirit, in ideology, and in essence. But in general, the Nasheeds have those general themes that I pointed out when we were going through the lyrics in my presentation. If you remember that, those themes are kind of standard. You know, the sword, the spear, blood, spilling the blood of the enemy. Some of the things you didn't see in the last few slides were about using the terminology of crusaders. But there are other terminologies as well. So for example, ISIS is known for its hatred of Shias. It's very rabid Sunni and particularly Wahhabi in its ideology and its outlook. And so in some nasheeds, you'll see particular terminology that condemns and ridicules Shias in particular. Or whoever that they in their kind of spectrum of enemies wants to make very specific condemnation against or ridicule against. But in general, there are standard themes in nasheeds. But the last few nasheeds, in the context of their demise of the caliphate, they're very specific about, you know, don't worry, and to rally the troops basically in terms of their spirit, because they were in decline or facing their demise in terms of territory.
Thank you. There are two questions. If you don't mind, we have already extended.
I'm wide awake now.
Two questions related to the target audience. I mean, I think you have also already thrown some light already on it. But there was one question regarding to what extent the ISIS was actually successful in terms of, you know, its propaganda when it comes to the Nasheeds. And there was also a question on, what are the Ankita had asked, what were the effect? Are there any study on the effect of their music and, you know, recruitment on ISIS? And maybe I can, if I can add a question of my own, this is slightly linked and a little different also, because when it comes to the ISIS, we know that they were also trying to recruit, women fighters, both for serving the men in different ways. Sometimes they obviously use them for sexual exploitation as well. But are there any specific, nasheeds or music to kind of target the woman audience, or were the women also doing something like that? The women ISIS fighters, if you have come across anything.
Yeah, actually, I'm not aware of any specific female either composed and sung nasheed for ISIS, or any ISIS nasheed that particularly targets females. However, going back to the earlier question, you can link my answer to that as well. Nasheeds in general are highly effective, especially to individuals who are already predisposed to enjoying and being inspired by Quran recitation, which is also usually a cappella with no instruments. And the better in Islam, the better your the voice and artistry of reciting Quran, the more you are praised and the more you are admired by the public in general. And so nasheeds take that to another level, right, in their artistry and in their messaging. And so that's why I say, turn to on YouTube, if you come across a nasheed, whether it's related to terrorism or not, just look at the comments that the public posts, right? On YouTube, you have that capability of posting, first of all, saying whether you like it or dislike it, and then the option to post your comment below the video, right? And I urge you, if you're more interested, to actually go to a nasheed on YouTube and look at the comments that people have posted. More often than not, the average person is showing or expressing praise for what they hear, because it's artistically usually very beautiful and melodic, and in terms of lyrics, usually religiously very inspiring. So I would suggest turning to those comments and see how people globally are reacting to a given nasheed, whether it's in the terrorism context or not.
Thank you. There were two questions from two of our young scholars, and
Sure.
If I put them in a nutshell, they're more or less related. The question related to use of graphic content in popular culture, especially by these organized gangs or terrorist groups, and the question related to freedom of expression. I mean, there's always this dichotomy between this, and this keeps coming on debate regularly. So if you have any comment on that.
I raised that in the paper as well, and that is, especially for the United States being a democracy, or Western Europe, or wherever you call yourself a free and open democracy, where you have the rights for creative expression. This becomes very complicated for those in law enforcement and intelligence and counterterrorism fields. It's very problematic, because especially for narco corridos who have CDs that you can buy off of Amazon, or buy tickets and watch the narco corrido bands perform in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or wherever it might be, or Texas, and they are jam-packed stadiums where they perform. How are you even going to entertain the issue of the kind of violence they glorify and promote, basically, whether it's a jihadist nasheed or narco corridos? In a democracy, you have rights for those kinds of creative expressions, and rights also to buy them or to download them or to watch them on your computer screen, right? I don't really have a clean answer for that, because that's the dichotomy of having democracy and rights and freedoms, where that kind of, in many cases, offensive messaging is allowed to proliferate. How do you crack that code? That's for policymakers and law enforcement officials to, first of all, be aware of, and then secondly, try to come up with strategies to deal with it. And especially when you cloak it in religion, it's especially sensitive. And that's why I mentioned that in my concluding remarks, that you have to approach it without offending religious and cultural sensitivities, in addition to democratic rights and freedoms? I'm afraid I don't have a clear answer on that.
Thanks. I think everyone would agree that this was fascinating discussion. One of
Thank
the
you.
great kind of discussions we had on MEI Speak in recent days, and I'm very enriched with the, especially because I also kind of do follow the
Yes.
developments in terms of ISIS. So personally, I feel very enriched, and you have kind of given us a very good idea about it. It also shows the passion with which you have researched.
Oh, thank you.
So for the final concluding remarks, I may now request Sir to take over.